Yeah, it was a lot of words and a lot of new terminology in terms of this eight forbearances and eight knowledges, but it can be a very complicated subject if you're talking about it from the lower school's point of view. For Prasangika, it's kind of simple in some regard because it's just even though we break it out into these different categories, they're all realized at the same time.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So anyway, I'll let you discuss.
Well, yeah, and Don, I just found that your presentation, prior to the forbearances and knowledges, there's an additional detail that I found pretty interesting, but it seemed to kind of slot in with what we've seen in other classes.
Hmm. Okay. Did you
I
want
don't
to
know if
talk
you
about that?
thought. Oh, not really. I just thought I'd make that remark. And
Oh,
then I had to get those old memory cells up and running again for the forbearances and
for that
knowledges.
part of the presentation tonight. Okay.
And were you talking about Tupten Chodron's book,
Yeah.
Samsara, Nirvana, and Buddha Nature?
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's a
they've
nice.
been going through this part of that book, I think, recently,
Hmm.
because they were talking about these same similes the other day.
Is this is in Venerable Children's teachings that you're talking about,
Yeah,
Sean? Yeah.
at the
Oh, okay.
Abbey.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that she's been teaching from those books since she was so kind of essential to putting them together with His Holiness's teachings. I gather from listening to her and what I've read that she actually had all of His Holiness's teaching and is kind of compiling it, and then I guess she reviews it with him just to make sure that he's okay with what she's done. But she's kind of the sort of craftsperson behind the scenes doing all of that editing and compiling. And it's quite nice because even though it's based on the Lam Rim, it's sort of setting things out in a slightly different order and introducing some topics like you don't hear anything about Buddha nature in the Lam Rim, but it's obviously an important topic when you
it
start
also
talking. Yeah.
it also covers some of the other traditions as well,
Hmm.
the Theravada, and also there's sometimes they talk about Zen as well, which is
Yeah.
interesting.
Chan Buddhism. Yeah. What have you. Yeah. Okay. So it
Yeah,
was
so the similes.
okay.
Okay, and we've covered the similes. The four classes of persons. Uh, really, you start with the fourth, which is more like us, the ordinary beings of the desire realm, like me, anyways. And then you go to the ordinary beings who are divorced from the manifest afflictions of the desire realms. So that would,
Those get put together in these four categories as
oh, I
just
see. I did.
ordinary beings.
Okay. Ordinary beings. Okay.
Yeah.
Ordinary beings, meaning they haven't had a direct realization of emptiness,
Correct.
although they could be very highly realized. Okay, so those go together. Um, Hinayana foe destroyers, so either arhats or um, arhats, either hearers or solitary realizers, and then
So that's the
being
second. That's the second group.
that's the second. Ordinary beings who have entered the path, and Hinayana Aryas.
Yeah, and on that one, what I talked about last week was even though it says ordinary beings have entered the path, that would be again the those on the path of accumulation and preparation who have yet to abandon those, but also those on the path of seeing and the path of meditation who are in the process of abandoning those. So those would be
Yeah.
the main abandonments for those folks. We're kind of lumping them all together because they're all generally talked about as being on the Hinayana path, though we could include in that even bodhisattvas on the learning path, you know. But mainly it's again been presented as the Hinayana path.
That seems a bit strange to mix ordinary beings who have entered a path and Aryas, even though they're Hinayana Aryas.
But if we talk about them as being they've entered a path, meaning they are on
Yeah,
the Hinayana path or the Mahayana path,
right. Right.
I think they'd be mainly talking about those on the Hinayana path, but nonetheless, their main obstacle that they are aiming to overcome is the initial one, the path of seeing abandonments. And then they would go on to abandon the path of meditation ones, you
Okay.
see. So Aryas would, of course, be in the process of abandoning it until they become an arhat.
Yeah, they would have attained the path of seeing.
Yeah. So these are at least beings who've entered a path, unlike ordinary beings who, you know, haven't done that yet.
Yeah. And I guess when we say ordinary beings, so they could have entered a Hinayana path or a Mahayana path.
It does seem like that's the case from the way it's set out there, but again, I tend to think it's mostly the Hinayana here, even though when we went through that explanation of path of seeing and path of meditation, it was from a Mahayana perspective. But I have the feeling it's mostly a Hinayana practitioner who's being talked about here.
Right. And then there's the Mahayana Aryas on either the impure grounds or pure grounds. So those are put together as well, I think.
Yeah. But it's kind of strange in there that we didn't include the ordinary beings who've entered the Mahayana path, because they too would have the path of seeing abandonments, some of the impure ground abandonments as their goal initially.
Right.
So I don't know. I mean, it's not an absolute thing, but in general, we can say that. I didn't get a chance again because we didn't get us that far to share the commentary from Geshe Loden on verse 134. When we get to that next week, he delineates those quite clearly in terms of, because even if you look at that verse 134, maybe I'll put it up on the screen real quickly, and we can see that the four beings are set out there in a very clear manner.
Yeah.
So where was that? Let's see here. By way of those defilements, the childish, ordinary beings, that's the first grouping, which covers the first four similes. Hinayana Arhats, which is the fifth, as Stephen was pointing out, then Hinayana Arya learners. And again, this is bracketed information, so it's just implying that that's in my estimation, that's the main people that's being posited for. That's the sixth and the seventh similes, and then the wise, the Mahayana Aryas. But you would include in that, I guess, again, obviously those ordinary beings who have entered the Hinayana path and ordinary beings who have entered the Mahayana path, who are preparing their minds to abandon the abandonments of the path of seeing on the Hinayana, as well as the abandonments of the impure grounds on the Mahayana. So, makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
So does it ever go into what this vajra-like meditative concentration is that is what it says destroys those final imprints of ignorance?
I guess it's got this special now. Maybe you've heard something more on it, Stephen. Were you going to share something?
No.
No. I mean, this is the name they give to that final uninterrupted path, though sometimes I even hear it being referred to as other, uninterrupted paths, but that's I guess why they're calling it vajra-like. A vajra is this indestructible, whatever the proper word is, phenomenon, is that when you enter into that, of course, you never exit from meditative equipoise again, because the uninterrupted path at the end of the continuum, the immediate next moment, is the path of release that is buddhahood, and you will be in a state of meditative equipoise for the duration of eternity. Right? Yeah. So at that very tail end, that last uninterrupted path on the 10th ground there, that's the one that we're calling, that's being called the vajra-like. And it has this indestructible component because you go into that and you never exit from that again. Whereas every uninterrupted path you had prior to that, again, the initial part of those herringbones, you always went into a path of release and came back out into subsequent attainment. Subsequent attainment is the white gaps that are between each of those herringbones, the where it's got the perfection that you work with, generosity, ethics, patience, and so on. Those are the time off the cushion when the bodhisattva is engaging in just other activities and other meditations and strengthening their mind and their practice through engaging in the deeds of the bodhisattva. And then they go, when they've accumulated the requisite amount of merit and have their wisdom at a level where it will act then the two of those together, the accumulation of merit and wisdom, that will allow you to develop the next uninterrupted path that works at the next level of obscuration to be removed. Then they go into that meditative equipoise and they come out in the next ground, but they always keep coming out of it. So my estimation of why this last one is called vajra-like is because it never diminishes. It's indestructible in that way. You don't come out of that meditative equipoise. You remain in it in the path of no more learning in Buddhahood.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder if Sean was kind of alluding to, I think at that very particular point, there's also like a tantric interpretation there, where that is the point where another class has explained that at this stage there's some form of tantric initiation that happens if the bodhisattva hasn't already had tantric initiations, but I guess that's out of the scope of this.
Yeah, I mean, I have to go back to the notes that I have from being taught that, but my understanding is that before you go into your final meditative equipoise, I think it would even be before that, though, that you would then taken to somehow manifest in a land where you receive tantric initiation from and practice the tantric path on the basis of all of your sutra realizations and then achieve that. But I don't know if that happens in meditative equipoise. I got the feeling that it had to happen outside of meditative equipoise, but I have to go back and look at my notes on that. By the way, some of the things that were brought up last week, such as the meditations on ugliness and that are antidotes to the afflictions, I did some research, but I'm going to have to wait till I get back in Santa Fe and I'll try to put some things together for you all on that. But they are mentioned. Some of these are mentioned in the fourth volume. I think it's the fourth volume of the text that we were talking about, His Holiness and Venerable Children's. It's the one that's called Following in the Buddha's Footsteps.
That's okay.
Is that the fourth one? I think the green one.
Yeah.
You can refer to them by their color. The red one is the samsara nirvana, and the green one is, it talks about those in there to some degree, but it's not real extensive. And when I looked at my other notes from my the transcripts from the master's program, there's some in there about it, but I'd have to kind of assemble it. So I'm going to need some more time to do that. But yeah, I'll see what I can find out too about this. What they say happens when you get to that level of the 10th ground bodhisattva. And if you haven't, because again, the teachings are that you have to practice Tantra in order to remove the subtlest obscurations in the mind, because you need the subtlest level of mind, which is the clear light mind, to realize emptiness at that stage. Otherwise, you can't remove everything that obscures the mind from Buddhahood. So you do have to be initiated into Tantra at that stage before achieving that realization. So, okay. Well, we're almost at the top of the hour. Were there any other questions maybe? I know we didn't do much discussion tonight, but these...
If I may, Don, just a quick question, and just kind of more a point of interest. So, for the uninterrupted path, it occurs at the end of every ground prior to entering the next ground, with the exception of the first uninterrupted path on the path of seeing. It's actually on the ground.
Right.
It seems kind of interesting to me, but I guess that first direct realization of emptiness is pretty special. Yeah,
and I mean, the consequence, if it wasn't on the path of seeing, if we said that you didn't have the uninterrupted path on the path of seeing, is that then you would have a person on the path of preparation having a direct realization of emptiness. prior to the path of seeing, which I guess, I mean, it just makes sense that you enter the path of seeing with the initial part of it when you have your initial realization that acts as the antidote to these acquired, and then the next moment is the path of release. And so these are all contained. So it's only the path of seeing, or the first ground, I think. Let me go back and put that in.
Exactly. Yeah.
That has two uninterrupted paths. That has the uninterrupted path that is at the end of the ordinary beings continuum before they become an Arya. So they've got that first uninterrupted path, and then they have a second uninterrupted path that, like you pointed out, acts as the doorway then to the path of release. That is where you enter the second ground, the next ground.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Again, yeah, when we went through this and paths and grounds, there were some slight modifications to it, but you still always have that process. Always enter into a new ground at the point where you remove all the obscurations relative to that ground that preceded it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? I mean, I wish I had more time to kind of like drive through and get like this whole section done. I was really hoping to like finish off this section at least tonight, because it's just a lot of information in here. And again, in relation to other times when have sort of left stuff out because I didn't feel like it was maybe as relevant, this seems quite important for people to at least be exposed to. Now, if I were, what I'll do at the end of this and putting an exam together for this course, I won't necessarily do an exam related to all that, because it's not the main subject matter of this, is the grounds and paths. But you don't really get kind of like a full course in the basic program that pertains to grounds and paths. The closest you come, I think, is in the Heart Sutra, when you go into the 5 paths and kind of study them to some degree as correlated to things in the text of the Heart Sutra. But that's kind of the implicit meaning of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, that not just teaching emptiness, but teaching the path that leads to attaining Buddhahood through the realization of emptiness and the stages of development that you go through. And that's actually the main subject matter ornament for clear realization, Avisamaylam Kara, Maitreya's other texts that we do study the 4th chapter of in the basic program, but it doesn't go into quite as much detail on the full process of grounds and paths. It does talk in there about uninterrupted paths and what have you, path of release, all that. But
that's why I found your course on Mahayana grounds and paths so useful, Don.
Yeah,
that you gave us that PowerPoint from tonight.
Yeah. Well, it came with there was a nice text that was at Venerable Chodron's website that she uses when she teaches on it. Again, there's no definitive text or something in relation to how Prasangika presents it. They have like a salam, a grounds and paths text from the Svatantrika Madhyamika point of view, but not from the Prasangika Madhyamika view, and they're very different in terms of the presentation.
There was a text by Levinson that we've used in other classes that we used in Mahayana grounds.
That's what I'm saying. That one does present it from Prasangika, but that's kind of one of I think the only one that is out there, and they usually teach it in the monasteries from the Svatantrika point of view. So they don't really use even that presentation that was translated. But I think it's a Tibetan author. I don't recall his name. This Levinson guy or woman, I can't remember who it is, person, has translated. All right. I think we should wrap up tonight. I feel kind of tongue-tied, and it's kind of late here, like I said. So we'll just wrap things up. Let me go to the prayers. Okay. So let's do the dedication prayers that we normally do. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. Oops. And then the prayer for His Holiness, and by virtue of this, think that we're creating the causes and conditions for all of our gurus that are still with us here in physical form to continue to be here with good health and long lives and all of their wishes fulfilled. the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world. To the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And then the prayer for Rinpoche's swift return, seeing how essential it is that we continue to have this relationship with this amazing being that we have karma with. We want that karma to ripen into his manifestation in this world again, to lead us and others on our path. Peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss! Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. Let's dedicate for those beings we're holding in our hearts, or those places in the world where there's great strife and difficulty and suffering, and send this positive energy out to those beings. Thinking that they receive it, it becomes the cause to remove their suffering immediately. And we just want to have this intention that everything we do have these immediate benefits to all beings, especially those that we're thinking of at this time. And then also that it will bring them all the causes for achieving complete enlightenment, the fulfillment of their welfare completely. And may this be so for all beings. All right, thank you for being patient with my teaching tonight.
Thanks very much,
feeling
Don.
a bit tired somehow. I'm surprised I got words out tonight, but
Well,
blessings of the gurus.
You have a lot going on, Don.
But anyway, I will have one more teaching from here next Thursday, and then the following Thursday will be, I get back on Wednesday, so I'll be teaching that Thursday, November 1st, I think it is, November 2nd, yeah. All right, be well.
All right. Good night, Sean.
Cognitive obscurations as they're indicated on here. So again, what this is saying is that there are essentially these beings who have attained these high levels of realizations who are arhats, or the equivalent in terms of a bodhisattva, and they have a mental body. We again talked about this mental body previously. This shows that they have not yet attained full enlightenment, because a Buddha does not require a mental body. Again, something arising from uncontaminated karma, and that is kind of along with these predispositions, these latencies of the afflictions that are, or latencies of ignorance in particular, that are together with that give rise to that type of a form, of a type of existence. Now, when I read the commentary by Geshe Jean-Paul Gyaltsen, I think is his name, he said that actually these three were the mental body of the desire realm, form realm, and formless realm. Now, again, I don't know. I mean, I'm not disagreeing or saying he's wrong in any way. I just think that there's a possibility too that you could read it in that other way. Because if we look at it and you say, well, these hearers in solitary realizers, when they become arhats, again, they become an arhat in a particular existence. It's unlikely that they're going to become an arhat in the formless realm, though I guess it's possible. I don't know. I think in general, you tend to be an arhat in either the human realm or one of the form god realms. But anyway, the idea here is that when you become an arhat, you still do have kind of a mental body that is manifesting, I would assume, at some sort of level, depending upon where you're at in that rebirth when you attain that state. I don't know. I mean, there's not a lot of talk about these arhats and what exactly happens to them. But essentially, when they attain that state, they have some sort of mental body that, again, they eventually abandon the physical body that they had together with that mind that was in the life where they attained arhatship, and they go on continuing that mental body. That mental body is, again, the mental body that these beings are disturbed from the solitary peace that they're in, and that encourages them to enter the Mahayana path so they can, complete the Mahayana path and achieve their full realization. Now, for the bodhisattvas, it's a little bit different, because when they attain the eighth ground, having abandoned the afflictive obscurations completely, well, then they definitely have a mental body that will be kind of the container, receptacle, if you will, for their primary consciousness and what goes on there. They no longer have any, karma that would be propelling them into other existences. They just continue to manifest in a variety of ways, and they have great powers at that level. But they continue to be trapped to some degree by that mental body, because they have not yet abandoned the knowledge obscurations. So they will take rebirth in whatever realm, or appear in whatever realm, desire realm, formless realm. But I had a hard time correlating those three realms with the arhats to some degree, the Hinayana arhats, because to me, it just doesn't make sense that they would necessarily be in all three of those realms. But again, whether it's the three vehicles, that each of those have a form or a mental body, or these three realms, as Geshe Jumpo Gyaltsen said, then I think that's his name, Gyaltsen. Anyway, doesn't really matter too much, but just know that this is, again, just speaking to evidence that there are these obscurations, that these imprints of ignorance exist, and that beings who have not yet abandoned them will be subject to continuing to have this undefiled mental body that is devoid of afflictions. But nonetheless, it has to eventually be released. You want to destroy, as it says there, that mental body by the exalted wisdom of the Tathagata enlightenment. This is the ground of imprints of ignorance. This is what is the last sort of layer of obscuration that these beings need to remove in order to actualize their full potential. Now, again, it talks here in terms of this statement here. It says, which will be destroyed by the exalted wisdom of the Tathagata enlightenment. Remember, everything that's in boldface here is directly from a Sangha's commentary. So Gyaltsab Je entertains a doubt on the next page as to, are they really destroyed by the exalted wisdom of the Tathagata enlightenment? And this gets into a whole discussion of like how exactly these obscurations are removed when it comes down to, the individual on the path, and the process by which that happens. So this is the argument being put forward. He says, one may wonder the ability to effortlessly and spontaneously work for others without having to rely upon a body with the nature of mind, these mental bodies that we're discussing, formed from the ground of the imprints of ignorance and the uncontaminated, non-afflicted karma, is a feature only of the perfect Buddha, right? Because it's only perfect Buddhas that have abandoned those mental bodies and that can do this. So he says, hence the line, it will be destroyed by the Tathagata's exalted wisdom. This cannot mean that the first moment of omniscience is an uninterrupted path and directly abandons the ground imprints of ignorance, because it would follow that the process of abandoning would still be present in the mind, and therefore this moment could not represent the ultimate abandonment. So this gets into this whole discussion of how these are abandoned in an actual meditative equipoise on emptiness. And I've touched on this a little bit, but this is an important point in this section. It's something that's kind of good knowledge to have. I think I've got the time to look at it in a little more detail. See on this chart, we have this little box here in the bottom, in the center there, that says uninterrupted path and path of release. I pointed this out previously, but essentially what is happening here, we're going to talk in particular, about the end of the continuum of a sentient being. This end point here, where the path of meditation ends and the path of no more learning begins. So you'll notice that there is the first part of it, which for all these other ones, it's a full herringbone, right? It's got the one going down from up on the left to down on the right, and the other one's going down on the left to up on the right. And so each of those is, again, respectively, an uninterrupted path and then a path of release. An uninterrupted path is called that because you go into it without any interruption to the mind going through that work of removing the afflictions. It acts as the antidote to the level of obscuration that is being removed. But it's not really that we can say that it's completely gone, because it takes the path of release in the next moment, once you have completely abandoned that level of obscuration, for this liberation to occur, for the actual freedom, for the true cessation to occur. So you'll notice again that for each of these other ones, as we went through the grounds, for the first ground, getting into the first ground, going into the second, third, fourth, and so on, every one of them had both an uninterrupted path and a path of release. But when we get to the end of the continuum on the 10th ground, at the end of the 10th ground, we notice that there is an uninterrupted path, which again, it acts in a similar way as all the other uninterrupted paths. It is the direct antidote to a level of the obscuration. In this case, the small level of obscurations, or small of the small, anyway, it's the very smallest level of obscuration pertaining to the cognitive obscurations, the obscurations to omniscience, the final ones that are being removed in order for that being to become a Buddha. So essentially what's happening here.
Oh, you're with that person, huh?
Okay, well, good night. Okay. Anyway, so the what's happening here at this very tail end of this, in this uninterrupted path, it's even got a special name. This is called the vajra-like samadhi, vajra-like meditative stabilization. That is going into this meditation to remove that final level of obscuration. And then when you have the very next side of it, when you cross that line, this over here on the right that's called the path of no more learning is the path of release. It's not indicated on there because, again, there's no path of release that's within the path of meditation for that. You are now on the path of no more learning. But what is being said in this argument is that if we say that at the level of the uninterrupted path, the abandonment has occurred, this ultimate abandonment, and that essentially you have a Buddha then, well, then there would be faults because you don't really have a Buddha yet. Even though it sounds really weird, because in the very next moment you become a Buddha through the path of release, you would have the consequences we're going to see in the text of the cause and result existing at the same time. Because the cause, the uninterrupted path, of the result, the liberated path, they have to be sequential. You can't have them at the same time, right? Cause and result never happen simultaneously. They are always one preceding the other. You also, of course, have the fault that this being would be able to do everything that a Buddha does, but it's not true. A 10th ground bodhisattva on the uninterrupted path doesn't have the powers of a Buddha. I mean, we don't really know because we're not there experiencing it or watching that being, but they don't yet have perfect knowledge of all conventional truths and ultimate truths simultaneously. They don't have the ability to manifest in the way that a Buddha does, with no effort, with a spontaneous ability. Okay. So again, this is what we're looking at in terms of this part of the text, is these sort of consequences. It's not a big deal, but I think it does help kind of illuminate and elaborate on some things that are good to know, some things that I have covered in other classes, but I don't know how much I've talked about some of this here. So I thought I would go through, and even though I could certainly skip over this part of the commentary, I think it's worthwhile. So again, to reread what it just said, it says, this cannot mean that the first moment of omniscience, in other words, that first moment of Buddhahood, is an uninterrupted path and directly abandons the ground imprints of ignorance, because it would follow that the process of abandoning would still be present in the mind. And therefore, this moment could not represent the ultimate abandonment. So there's a conflict there because of the way that we just looked at it, how it's set out and how it actually does transpire. Continuing, it says, if the uninterrupted path at the very end of the continuum of the 10th ground, the 10th bhumi, were without a trace of defilement, then obviously the first moment of omniscience could not be an uninterrupted path. However, further on in the text, it talks of the defilements found in the 3 pure levels being destroyed by the vajra-like meditative concentration. And so what does it mean to say here that the imprints of ignorance are destroyed by the Tathagata's exalted wisdom? And there's a footnote on this. It's kind of saying what I said earlier. The gist of this query is that if the imprints of ignorance are destroyed by the Tathagata's exalted wisdom, then that exalted wisdom must be an uninterrupted path, as opposed to a path of freedom, a path of release, which is a meditative absorption that actually destroys the afflictions. Again, the uninterrupted path is the one that destroys them. Then they are kind of abandoned when you get to, fully abandoned when you get to the path of release. The example that's frequently used, it's like if you have a thief in your house or a robber in your house and you put them out the door, that's the path of the uninterrupted path. But then when you close the door so that they cannot return again, can't come into your house because the door is locked and closed, then that's the path of release. That's when, again, you have the true cessation, the actual complete cessation of those afflictions, so that they will not, or obscurations, so that they will not return again. Continuing with this footnote, it says, if that were the case, if it was a Tathagata's exalted wisdom that destroyed it, then the first moment of enlightenment would not be enlightenment, because the abandoning process would still be going on, right? We haven't gotten to the resultant state of the path of release yet. If there was nothing left to abandon at the very last moment of the 10th level, then the next moment, the first of enlightenment, could not be an uninterrupted path, right? Because that would have to precede it. However, later on, the text clearly says that it is. So anyway, that we'll get to that and see if we can clarify all of that at a later point. But this is the whole gist of this argument, is when is this final level of obscuration or abandonment occurring? So going to the center there, where right past that note 108, it says, this has been explained already. However, to repeat, the subtlest ground of the imprints of ignorance is directly destroyed by the end of continuum uninterrupted path on the 10th bhumi, the 10th level. However, if this 10th level continuum arose in the form of a mental body and were to teach and so forth, if the bodhisattva who was in this meditative equipoise having this uninterrupted path were to arise in the form of a mental body to teach others, it would have to do so with very subtle motivational effort, just like prior to that, because it's not yet a Buddha. It's not the mind of a Buddha until the path of release. Therefore, the above was stated that way to show that teaching Dharma to sentient beings, having abandoned such karma in such a body, is a feature found solely in the ultimate actualization of the reality limit. In other words, the complete achievement of Buddhahood. However, while in meditative equipoise on the uninterrupted path on the 10th level end of continuum, if one does not also directly perceive all conventional phenomena, then it goes without saying that one could not work for sentient beings by direct teachings and so forth. There's a lot to be said on this subject, but that will do for now. And again, he's going to talk about this fact of, a kind of cause and result being simultaneous. At least I remember seeing it in the commentary as I was preparing. But the idea, again, that if you look at this 10th ground bodhisattva, they're coming up to this moment where in the very next moment, with the path of release, they will become a Buddha. We have to qualify that at that level of just the uninterrupted path, as much as it's just an instant in time and they'll fall over into that path of release very quickly, they still don't have the powers of a Buddha. They lack that wisdom that knows conventionalities and ultimate truths simultaneously. They lack the power to spontaneously manifest for the benefit of others. So this is just getting into some fine points, but we're talking about for these arhats who have to remove this, how is that actually occurring? It's actually going to occur in its final form. You will abandon them in their entirety, the knowledge obscurations, when you achieve the uninterrupted path as the antidote, the immediate antidote to them, and then the path of release when you actually attain Buddhahood and actualize everything that is involved in that. So that was number 5 of the 9 levels. Now we go to 6 and 7. And these, again, the topic outline is the path of seeing and path of meditation abandonments. Now recall that I just said this a short while ago, but I'll just remind you. In our charts and all of what we're studying here, it's being pointed out that these are the Hinayana paths of seeing and meditation. However, the explanation is going to talk about them from a Mahayana point of view. So when we talk about the Mahayana point of view, that's again these 2 paths that are on the chart here. Path of seeing being the initial direct realization of emptiness for someone who enters the Mahayana path from the very beginning, not one of those arhats that has to come into the Mahayana path after having achieved the complete abandonment of the afflictive obscurations. So they have their initial direct realization of emptiness, and as it says there, at level G, this is the point of direct realization of emptiness, and what they are abandoning when it comes to the actual abandonments. I'm not sure if this is in the chart here, but what they are abandoning is essentially what are called the acquired or artificial the intellectually acquired afflictive obscurations. This isn't even on this chart, kind of dividing those into two. So if we look at this little box where the obscurations are talked about in the lower right-hand corner there, we see that the afflictive obscurations are obscurations to liberation, are the conception of inherent existence along with its seeds, while the cognitive obscurations to enlightenment or omniscience are the imprints of the conception of inherent existence and all factors of mistaken dualistic appearance. Again, we'll go into these in more detail shortly. But within the afflictive, we actually have two levels. We have that which is intellectually acquired, meaning acquired in this life through false tenets and false thinking and what have you. And then we have the innate that we carry from life to life. The initial level is going to be abandoned here on the path of seeing. Then from the end of the first ground, where we have the uninterrupted path, all the way through the completion of the this meditative equipoise that goes into the eighth ground. You exit the seventh ground, enter the eighth ground. At that point, you have abandoned all of the innate afflictive obscurations because they are abandoned on these impure grounds. Again, they're called impure because you still have that conception of inherent existence and the seeds and so on. When you go into the eighth ground and the pure grounds, at that point, the Bodhisattva has abandoned all of the afflictive obscurations in their entirety, both the innate that were on, the acquired that were on the path of seeing, and the innate, which were abandoned on the first seven levels, through the first seven levels of the path of meditation. The remaining path of meditation is to abandon the knowledge obscurations, okay? So that's what we're talking about here in this section. Even though, again, in the Hinayana perspective, it's purely the afflictive obscurations. You don't even touch the knowledge obscurations. So let's go through the definitions of these two types of obscuration first. Again, this is a very informative section. I realize it's kind of like last week. We went into a lot of detail on things, and we're going to do a bit more of that tonight. And then we'll be back in the similes by next week and kind of looking at them and going back to the poetics of them as opposed to all of this additional knowledge. So Gyaltsab Je says, if we separate liberation and omniscience, remember liberation is the attainment of arhatship, it is the complete freedom from samsara, whereas omniscience is the full potential of the mind brought to its state by virtue of having abandoned not just the afflictive obscurations, but the knowledge obscurations. So if we were to separate into those two categories of those two states, these two states of definite goodness that we can achieve on the Buddhist path, then obscurations of affliction, or again, afflictive obscurations, obscurations to liberation, different names for these, are in the category of those obscurations that we might insert in here mainly hinder the attainment of liberation. You know, they are the ones that mainly keep us from achieving that first goal, liberation, which is our self-liberation, freedom from our own ground of cyclic existence, samsara. Obscurations to phenomena, and they're going to explain why they call this second level of obscurations that in a moment. But essentially, this is referring to the knowledge obscurations, the cognitive obscurations, those that are obscurations to buddhahood or omniscience, are in the category of obscurations that again mainly hinder the attainment of omniscience. The latter hinder the attainment of a meditative absorption constantly focused on the end of until the end of samsara on phenomena as they truly are. That is again one element of a Buddha's mind, the meditative state of equipoise on emptiness, ultimate truth. And that is also the attainment of the direct perception of all conventional phenomena. So again, that's the mind of a Buddha, knowing both truths, the ultimate truth and conventional truth. Therefore, these obscurations are known and recited here as obscurations to phenomena or obscurations of phenomena. Because when you attain that state of Buddhahood, you have knowledge of all phenomena. So again, it's a slightly different name. It's not one we use frequently. And if you go to the note there, it says normally this term is translated obscurations to omniscience, but here it's translated according to its etymology, which we just went through. When you are able to know through that omniscient mind all phenomena, both conventional and ultimate truths. Okay, so that was just going to get us in the ballpark of talking about these two obscurations. Again, the first being those that mainly hinder liberation, and then the second being those that mainly hinder the attainment of Buddhahood, omniscience. Obscurations of affliction, the first one, have been described as being states of mind that make the mental continuum unpeaceful. What does this mean? The opposite of this description, the mental continuum in a very peaceful state, refers to nirvana, which is the mere liberation from and complete pacification of the sufferings of samsara. So again, we generally use the term nirvana to refer to that pacification that is attained by those who attain the level of arhatship, whether it be the two hearers and solitary realizers who do that through their hinayana path and achieve that on their path of no more learning, or the bodhisattvas who attain it when they get to the eighth ground after having gone through the removal of both the afflicted or the acquired and the innate afflictive obscurations. Okay, so that's what we mean in terms of this terminology here of being these afflictive obscurations being those which make the mind unpeaceful. And the peaceful state is nirvana, the state of pacification. Now, we do talk about Buddhahood being non-abiding nirvana, but that's a different form of nirvana. So what's being referred to here as simply nirvana, mere nirvana, is this mere liberation that one attains for oneself. Again, so it's primarily those of the Hinayana, because the bodhisattvas, they attain this, but they don't abide there by any means. They keep moving on until they achieve the full non-abiding nirvana that is Buddhahood. To conclude this paragraph, the last two sentences, therefore, the mental continuum in a very unpeaceful state refers to the sufferings of samsara, right? Buddha nature gives us the potential for experiencing either one. Right now, we haven't realized our Buddha nature, but we have a mind that is empty of inherent existence, and we keep creating the causes to experience the unpeaceful state, the sufferings of samsara. If we put into effect the removal of these levels of obscuration, the afflictive obscurations, then we can attain the pacified state, nirvana. And those are both states that exist within our Buddha nature. It's just, again, a choice of which one we would rather be on and what effort we have put into attaining some level of freedom from the sufferings of samsara. The creators of those sufferings are known as afflictions or the obscurations of affliction. And the creator of nirvana is the truth of the path, the true paths, the direct realizations of emptiness, again, that will allow you to remove layer by layer all these afflictive obscurations. And then, of course, if you're a bodhisattva, you go on to remove all of those that are in the vein of the knowledge obscurations through true paths as well. The true paths are direct realizations of emptiness, meditative equipoise with an uninterrupted path, and then a path of release where you keep removing layer by layer. Okay. So that was just, again, this was called definitions of the two types of obscuration. So we kind of have defined them in a rough way. We haven't gotten into kind of the examples of them that indicate at a deeper level what is meant by them. So obscurations of affliction, the first of these two categories, two types of obscuration, refers to afflicted ignorance, which of course is the ignorance that is at the root of all of our problems. As it says there, this is a mind that holds to the true existence of the person and the aggregates or other phenomena beyond the person, and to manifest desire and so forth that are created by that ignorance, together with the seeds of these afflictions. Again, so what we're saying by this term afflictive obscurations are primarily the afflicted ignorance that's at the root of all of that, that is grasping at true existence of both ourselves and other persons, as well as all phenomena. That, together with all the afflictions that arise on the basis of that, and the seeds of both of those, the dormant states of both of those, that again give rise to future moments of ignorance and attachment and anger and hatred and what have you. All right. That's what's meant by the afflictive obscurations. Then it says obscurations to phenomena, which once more is the term that's being used here for knowledge obstructions or obscurations to omniscience, refers to the appearance of objects in their mistaken aspect of appearing to truly exist, and to the imprints of afflictions, which create such appearances. In other words, we have a manifest form of that whenever we are having things appear to us as truly existent, which happens anytime we are not in meditative equipoise on emptiness until you become a Buddha. Those false appearances that are arising constantly that we are all dealing with right now, everything that's appearing to our senses as well as our mental consciousness is together with that false appearance. And then, of course, what is causing that false appearance? The imprints of ignorance, and we can say the other afflictions because they're always together with ignorance, but it's essentially that ignorance that grasps at inherent existence creates these subtle imprints, these predispositions that give rise to that false appearance. So again, this is a much subtler obscuration, and this is not an obscuration that the Hinayana arhats abandon or touch on, like I said earlier. This is a goal. The goal of the bodhisattvas is to abandon that because their goal is to obtain omniscience, to obtain buddhahood. But they have to, of course, abandon the afflictive obscurations first, as we've seen whenever we look at that chart on the 5 paths. All right, we're getting there, going through each of these little sections. These are quite full sections, so hang in there. Number 3, differences between path of seeing and path of meditation, abandonments. So when we talk about what's being abandoned on these 2 paths, we have to define more clearly what is the nature of the actual abandonments, the things, the obscurations that are going to be removed. Now, as I said, even though this is introduced throughout our text as the Hinayana path of seeing and path of meditation, we're going to talk about it from the point of view of a bodhisattva, the Mahayana path of seeing and meditation. Merely thinking that the self and aggregates truly exist, together with the seeds of such a thought, again, we just talked about those, and thinking that the self and aggregates truly exist as a result of an investigation into whether they truly exist or not, together with the seeds of such a thought, are both mentally constructed obscurations of affliction that will be destroyed by the path of seeing. This is a little, I didn't get a good commentary on this to work with. Geshe Jean-Paul Geltsen didn't really go into it, but it seems like when it says merely thinking that the self and aggregates truly exist, I mean, that can't be every moment of our thinking that they truly exist, because some of them are arising from our innate obscurations, innate afflictive obscurations. But it does seem like the second part in particular, when we have an adherence to true existence based on a sort of faulty investigation, an investigation into whether things truly exist or not, if we come away from that investigation thinking that they do exist truly, which again is what all the lower schools adhere to. And I mentioned this in a previous class, right? When we talk about Prasangika Madhyamaka, even within the Madhyamaka, the middle way school, there's the Svatantrikas that don't go that far. They still think that things have some inherent essence, right? So, and when they investigate, they find some true essence. This is why they can point to something that they say is the real person. The continuum of the mental consciousness, for example, or whatever it is that they point to. They say that is the real person. Prasangika says there is no real person in terms of there being some real referent of the person. There's only that which is labeled as the person and the label person that is given to that, the basis of labeling and then the label given. So essentially, all of these other schools do investigations, and again, not to say that these are only going to arise when we do these kinds of investigations, but anytime we kind of, through examining the world around us or ourselves and making sort of a cursory examination of things, and we get to a place where we think things are real in the way that they appear, that gives us these acquired afflictive obscurations that reinforces the innate ignorance that we have and makes it kind of something that we are generating in this lifetime on the basis of false tenets or false ways of thinking. So it seems like the first part of that paragraph, where that sentence is really talking about any of the times that we have thinking that is influenced by this sort of grasping at things on the basis of some faulty investigation. I'm not sure, again, that's 100% accurate, but it doesn't seem like I've got anything else to work with in terms of Gyaltsab J's commentary, because it sounds like that first part of the sentence is just talking about our innate obscurations and when they become manifest, when those seeds of ignorance are manifest in terms of our thinking that things truly exist. Almost everyone points to the second part of this, thinking that the self and aggregates truly exist as a result of an investigation into whether they truly exist or not. And then together with the seeds of such a thought, you acquire those in this very life. And again, they're acquired and kind of complement the innate ones, but they are a different category. They are mentally constructed. This is the term that's used in this translation for acquired or intellectually acquired. Jeffrey Hopkins likes the term artificial. Again, this is one of the big problems we have in Tibetan Buddhism because it's Tibetan words that are being translated by different people into different English. But these mentally constructed obscurations of affliction will end up being destroyed by the path of seeing. Remember, I mentioned that just a short while ago. When we get to this path of seeing, what is abandoned here in this first, herringbone thing, uninterrupted path and the path of release, is only the acquired level of the afflictive obscurations, those that we've acquired in this lifetime. We haven't even touched the innate until you go into your second meditative equipoise that will result in you entering into the second ground. And of course, in the uninterrupted path, it already puts you on the path of meditation. Okay. So continuing on, it says there in the that fourth line of that paragraph, desire and other afflictions are also brought on by the power of mentally constructed obscurations of affliction, right? It's not just ignorance, it's also the other afflictions that arise on the basis of those acquired forms of ignorance. States of mind, such as holding to true existence, desire, etc., together with their seeds, which do not depend on such investigation, but arise naturally, are the innate obscurations of affliction to be destroyed by the path of meditation. Remember, I talked about that as well. And again, they are destroyed by the Hinayana path of meditation as well. Because again, the Hinayanas have a similar 5 schema path, but they do something different here in the path of meditation. They don't abandon the knowledge obstructions at all. It's spread out over a number of levels, and they eventually abandon all of the acquired and the innate afflictive obscurations. But for the Bodhisattva, they abandon the innate obscurations, afflictive obscurations, on these grounds, these first, going into the second ground, and then, of course, all the way through the seventh ground. When they enter into the eighth ground, the innate afflictive obscurations have been abandoned completely. Now, let's talk a little bit about the knowledge obscurations or obscurations to phenomena. Again, we've explained what they are, these false appearances, as well as the kind of imprints or latencies of ignorance that give rise to those appearances. It says here, a mentally constructed obscuration to phenomena is a mind together with the seeds of that mind, thinking that the appearance of objects is truly existent to sense consciousnesses, apprehending form and so forth, is not a mistaken appearance. Now, both Geshe Jean-Paul Gyaltsen and myself are very puzzled by this. And even the last time I taught on this text at this level of going through the commentary, I had a real problem with it. And that's because even we're not in any way, and Geshe Jean-Paul Gyaltsen makes it clear, he's not questioning Gyaltsab-je. Gyaltsab-je was an amazing scholar, one of the 2 spiritual sons of Lama Tsongkhapa. We're not doubting his acumen, but this is a very strange comment. Usually when we talk about the knowledge obscurations, it does have, again, the imprints that give rise to the false appearance, the manifesting of that. So you have imprints and manifestations, but you don't ever talk about them being innate and acquired, right? So this is very strange to say that this is acquired, right? We go back to the text, it says there, we've already talked about innate. Well, that's what we usually talk about as being just obscurations to phenomena, not them being designated as innate. They're only innate. But a mentally constructed or artificial or acquired obscuration to phenomena, we usually don't talk about such things because that's not what's going on. And it's very strange in that passage that I just had up on the screen and you have in front of you, that it talks about them being thinking that that's a correct appearance. Well, that can only be happening prior to the 8th ground, right? Because you wouldn't have a bodhisattva believing in and thinking about the inherent existence of things once you've abandoned the afflictive obscurations, because that ignorance no longer arises that believes in those false appearances. even prior to that, when you're on the learning grounds and what have you, before you've attained the impure grounds, before you've attained the pure grounds, you still wouldn't even have a strong adherence to those false appearances, because you know that they are completely out of touch with how things actually exist. They are not in accord with reality. So again, there's some strange things in this part of the text that I'm just pointing out, so that you know that if you read it and you start scratching your head, that's okay. It's good to scratch your head at that comment, because that is a very strange one in that paragraph, in terms of a mentally constructed knowledge obscuration to phenomena, because that is not something that is usually taught. Okay, now let's look at the brief explanation of how the seeds are destroyed. We already talked about this a little bit, but I think it is kind of nice to go through this and to have a deeper understanding of what's happening. The way the path of seeing destroys the path of seeing abandonments, which are essentially the level of obscurations that are to be abandoned on that path, can be illustrated with an example. At the moment of the creation of the path of seeing, uninterrupted path of forbearance on the truth of suffering, the seeds of the path of seeing abandonments, which are the actual phenomena to be attacked, have ceased to exist. Again, this would be the seeds of the acquired afflictive obscurations, because remember, we just talked about those being what are abandoned on the path of seeing. The process of working towards this uninterrupted path and the process of working towards the cessation of those abandonments occur at the same time. It's kind of like, when you have a seesaw, and you have kind of, when the point over on this side is going down while that one's going up, these are happening simultaneously, right? You've got this process where you have to say that there's like an uninterrupted path that's being introduced that is causing the abandonment to occur, right? Or vice versa, whatever way you want to do this. I don't know which one makes more sense in terms of what we're talking about. This is how things are actually happening. We're going to see later, I think it's on the next page, different ways that it could be proposed as to how this occurs. But as what's going on is like when you introducing the uninterrupted path, it is causing an immediate reversal of that, so that you then have the freedom. Eventually, when you have gotten rid of those in their entirety, then you have the path of release. That's what happens in the very next moment. Again, it's a causal process. It's not something that is happening kind of completely in a strange, as soon as you introduce it, then they're completely gone. You have this process of this sort of like, again, a seesaw, where you have one side going down while the other side is going up. So it says, and this uninterrupted and similar type continuation of previous moments is a process by which the power of the uninterrupted path does not allow those abandonments to be generated from that moment onwards. In other words, you have put the thief, by the time you get to grab the thief and put them out the door, they are out the door. Then it says here, the subsequent achievement brought about by the power of this antidote, which is the first truth of cessation path endowed with the characteristic of not allowing the creation of abandonments, is known as the path of freedom, and is a path created by the uninterrupted path. That's the path of release, the path of freedom. So whenever they talk about abandonments, you're talking about what is to be abandoned. The level of abandonments will no longer be created at the point where you have closed the door. You've kept them from ever occurring again. So again, when we talk about this in terms of the uninterrupted path on the path of seeing here, again, the first of these, the left side of the herringbone, you have the uninterrupted path is being generated at the same, in like within the same moment, the obscurations that are being abandoned, which again are the acquired afflictive obscurations, are being removed. So you have like the path being generated, those being removed. When they are completely gone, then you've got the abandonment that has occurred, and you fall immediately into the path of release. The path of release is such that they will never recur again. That has been made kind of final. Again, these are a cause and result. The cause of the path of release is the uninterrupted path. The path of uninterrupted path acts as the cause for the resultant path of release. And this is how we proceed, again, going forward. But on the path of seeing is what's being talked about here in particular at this point. Now, again, I'm going to talk a little bit later about this first part where it went into that it's seeing the uninterrupted path of forbearance on the truth of suffering. I'll go into that shortly. Just hang on to that thought, because I'm not just going to, I want to explain it when we get to another section where we talk about these 8 forbearances and 8 knowledges that are on the path of seeing. Because again, it's just kind of a unique way that the path of seeing is presented. Okay, let's carry on though. It says here, during the time of the uninterrupted path, its particular share of abandonments, again, in the terms of the path of seeing, is the acquired afflictive obscurations. Its particular share of abandonments is not present. In other words, the thief is out of the house, and it possesses the characteristic of not allowing them to develop again. However, this is due to the absence of circumstances, right? Because they're in meditative equipoise. It's not a cessation gained by analysis. If we look at the footnote on that, it's just giving us, a cessation gained by the uninterrupted path. It's something that is, not yet a full cessation. Oops, I got to go a little more further here. It's not a cessation that is gained through the full seeing it through to the path of release. However, we can say that you won't have an arisal at that level during the uninterrupted path, because there aren't the circumstances that would allow it to arise. You have put the thief out, but again, you still have to close the door. The next sentence, one can infer from this that during the uninterrupted path of the 10th level end of continuum, there is not even a trace of any kind of defiled imprint. But one should not say that they have been abandoned for good at that point, because from the point of view of being subsequently established by the power of the actual antidote, the path characterized by not allowing further creation has not yet been achieved. Again, we have the same problem when we get to the end of the continuum, as we just went through a short while ago. The uninterrupted path acts as the antidote to it, and in a sense, again, has put the thief out, but the door has not yet been closed. That next path of release that becomes the path of no more learning is an exact same corollary to what happens on every other uninterrupted path, beginning with the path of seeing. When you first have the antidote through your initial uninterrupted path, and then in the next moment when that has been completely generated, you have the path of release. This is how they all proceed, okay? There's no difference. So it says, if you disagree with this reason, then it would follow that cause and effect would have to be simultaneous. Again, this is what I mentioned earlier. You would have that fault in that previous analysis as well, but here it's just being highlighted, because if you say that what is happening at this point, when you just have the uninterrupted path at the end of the continuum, if at that point the cessation has occurred, well, then you have the cessation, which is the result of the uninterrupted path, happening simultaneously. You have cause and result occurring in the same moment, and that is not possible within logic. Cause always precedes results, and you'd never have the result without the cause having preceded it. Okay, I know this is a lot of words and a lot of concepts tonight, but bear with me. Okay, some maintain that during the path of seeing, uninterrupted path, there are no actual abandonments present, and yet assert that during the uninterrupted path of the 10th level end of continuum, subtle defilement imprints do exist. This is kind of another view, that even though we can say at the uninterrupted path, those abandonments aren't present, but at the 10th level, there's something different about the uninterrupted path there where they still do exist. Well, such an assertion, Gyaltsab Je says, is to place the philosophical concepts of abandonment by development and abandonment by cessation together on the same side. As is said in note 111, it's not consistent to use one philosophical concept for the path of seeing and another for the 10th level when resolving the same philosophical point of when are these actually abandoned. The abandonment occurs in the uninterrupted path, regardless of where you're at. And then, of course, the path of release is when you have the actual cessation, when you can say at that point, it is gone from the mind, will never recur in the mind again. If you use the process of abandonment in this footnote, it says by development to explain the path of seeing, then you should use the same concept for the 10th level, right? That this is how the development occurs of the uninterrupted path being introduced, the level of obscuration that is being abandoned, being removed, and then in the very next moment, once it has been fully removed, you have the liberated path. you have the path of release. Okay, so that's what was kind of somebody putting forward some kind of cockeyed, opinion about what happens at the 10th level being different from what happens at the path of seeing level. It says there in the last sentence of that paragraph, moreover, to assert that the first moment of omniscience is the actual destroyer of those subtle defiled imprints is not to understand the way antidotes destroy abandonments. This is something he covered previously, right? We went through this already tonight. The first moment of omniscience isn't the actual destroyer. It's the state of having destroyed, the true cessation that occurs, the path of release that is the final kind of result of the entire path and the first moment of buddhahood, first moment of omniscience. Next paragraph. Some who have not ascertained the meaning of because it is past, it cannot be, ... and so forth, from the Dharma Samuccaya, agree that the three posited processes of destroying manifest afflictions are incorrect. These are what we're going to get into in the next paragraph. These are three possibilities of how the uninterrupted path is working in terms of the levels of abandonment that are being abandoned. I remember I talked about them being kind of a simultaneous process of one, the path being introduced and the obscurations being removed. And they say, but they assert that the seeds to be destroyed in the uninterrupted path, which is the actual antidote, do exist at the same time. However, this also is not to ascertain its meaning. If it were, then you would have to accept that light and darkness, as destroyer and destroyed, exist at the same time. Because this very example is taught as an illustration of this process. I use the example of the thief and throwing out the thief, but sometimes there's the idea of you've introduced light, and at the moment of introducing light, darkness is diminishing and disappears, right? So you don't have it present when you have the light present in its full capacity, but the process of that happening is simultaneously, occurring. So let's look at these three. These are kind of interesting, and I don't have a perfect way of explaining these. I'm going to use some of Geshe Jumpo Gyaltsen's commentary because I think he does a better job explaining it than what I do, perhaps. He says here, Gyaltsen says, therefore, the destruction by the uninterrupted path of its targeted seeds or obscurations is not first like a pot previously smashed by a hammer, where during the path's time of existence, the uninterrupted path's time of existence, the seeds to be destroyed have already gone. So it's not something where you introduce it and the seeds have already gone. They're diminishing at the same time. Again, like that seesaw, right? That's the first one, kind of saying that the seeds are already past when the uninterrupted path comes into play. Number two, it's not like pushing someone in front of you, where during the uninterrupted path's existence, the seeds have not yet appeared to be destroyed. So it's not like you generate the uninterrupted path and then the seeds come in some point in the future, like they're not there. They're not existing in the future when you're introducing the uninterrupted path either. It's also not like the third example, a yak and its load thrown over a cliff. This is a horrible image, where during the uninterrupted path's existence, the seeds exist and are destroyed at the same time. So it's not like this instantaneous sort of them, happening within that single moment. It's this simultaneous process. Again, so what is the destruction process? By prior developmental meditation on the antidote practices, the movement towards the creation of the antidote and the movement towards the cessation of the last moment of the continuum of seeds to be destroyed are simultaneous. By the simultaneous creation of the antidote and cessation of the seeds, the characteristic of not allowing the abandonment to arise is developed. And this is the meaning of destruction. So let me read what Geshe Jumpo Gyaltsen says, because I think it might be more elucidating. I don't know. I tried to explain it as best as I could, but once more, we do have this idea that you kind of have this seesaw, that while this one's going down, this one's going up, right? And this is all happening very quickly within the meditative equipoise. But it's not like, again, that the seeds are somehow in the future, or while this is kind of being introduced, or that the seeds were in the past, and as soon as this is introduced, they're no longer there. Nor is it something where, again, in the third one, like the yak and its load being thrown over the cliff together kind of thing. It's a process where one is coming into play, the other is going out of play, if you will. So this is what Geshe Gelsen says, he says, we can, the first example was of the hammer that destroyed the pot, whereby the pot, which are the seeds of the afflictions, has been destroyed and past, while the hammer, the uninterrupted path, the antidote, still exists in the present. The seed is not of the past at the time of the uninterrupted path. The second example was of pushing someone in front, where during the uninterrupted past existence, the seeds have not yet appeared, right? They are still kind of out there waiting to be destroyed. No, that isn't how it happens either. This is, of course, not correct. The third example was of the yak and its load falling together off the cliff, which illustrates that the seed will be present at the time of the uninterrupted path. And that's not the case either. Again, even though this is happening with this kind of seesaw thing, we can say that there is kind of the destruction occurring while the creation of the cessation is coming into play. And then in the very next moment, again, you have the full cessation. He says, how does it work? All necessary causes and conditions, such as the accumulations of merit and wisdom, are gathered together. And when these causes are created, when you're in that meditative equipoise, there is simultaneously the rising of the uninterrupted path and the absence of the seed, while the seed has not been abandoned. The rising of the uninterrupted path and the absence of the seed happen at the same time. Then we could wonder what happens at the uninterrupted path when the seed is no more present, right? Okay, so if you have this and this uninterrupted path being introduced to where the seed's no longer present, at the very next moment you have the path of release. He says, when it has been destroyed, it has become the path of release. So I know it's kind of still doesn't make like complete sense to me, but this is because this third one still sounds a bit similar to like them coexisting. But you're introducing the uninterrupted path. It's acting as an antidote. Again, it's quite not spontaneous, but very, very quick. And the seeds are destroyed. As soon as they're destroyed, you have the very next moment, which is the path of release, when you have the true cessation. And I hope that this is worthwhile for you to go through all of this at this level of detail, but I find it kind of interesting just to pick it apart and know sort of what's going on. You know, what is this process by which this is actually occurring? You know, we are introducing this wisdom that is the antidote to a particular level. When we're introducing that through the uninterrupted path, it's acting as the immediate antidote to that level of obscuration. As soon as it is removed in its entirety, then we have the path of release. All right, let's go through the remainder of this. It says here, okay, so I think I went through all of that one then, right? I read that whole paragraph, I think. Let me just read the last sentence again then. By the simultaneous creation of the antidote and cessation of the seeds, the characteristic of not allowing the abandonments to arise is developed. And this is the meaning of destruction, saying at that point they've been destroyed. The thief has been thrown out, the light has been introduced, and the darkness is no longer present. Now, this is where we get into this rather complicated part. If you think the rest was complicated tonight, well then hang on, because we're going to go for a little ride here. I knew I wasn't going to probably have time to go through all of this, but nonetheless, I'm going to share with you some slides. I know, Stephen, I think you were present at the class that I did. I decided not just to recreate these in my the slides for this class, but rather just use and maybe supplement with a few small things. Slides that I used in a course I did for Tibetan Buddhism back in March and April of 2021. It's called Mapping the Road to Enlightenment, which is where I went through the traditional texts that are called Salam. Sa is ground and Lam is path. It's the grounds and paths. It's an explanation of the entire process of going through that whole chart that we've been going back to every now and then that has the 5 paths and the 10 grounds on it. So again, I've added a few slides. It doesn't matter. I mean, this is just a little commentary thing here. So this is one of the slides I added just to reiterate. Through the path of seeing, a yogi removes artificial, or again, we tend to call them intellectually acquired, but again, there are different names for them. Mentally constructed, I think, was what we had in our text, the translator for that. These conceptions of inherent existence that again are acquired in this life, those acquired not from beginningless conditioning, but from contact with false systems of teaching. False teachings fortify the innate misconception of the inherent existence of persons and other phenomena. So again, the false teachings kind of strengthen the innate misconceptions that we have, the innate obscurations, which are acquired from beginningless misconception of the nature of things and is overcome on the path of meditation through continuous conditioning to the truth. So again, the path of seeing is where you remove the artificial. The path of meditation is where you remove the innate. Okay, let's carry on now with a more detailed explanation of what happens specifically on the path of seeing, which is what we're going to go to in our text after we go through these slides. The meditative equipoise of the path of seeing is divided into two parts. Again, we talked about these: an uninterrupted path that abandons the artificial afflictions, and a path of release that is the state of having abandoned those artificial afflictions. An uninterrupted path is so named because without interruption or interval, a yogi will pass on to a path of release that is a condition of having been released from these afflictions, the actual cessation again. The uninterrupted path of a path of seeing corresponds to, and this is unique to the path of seeing, this is not something that happens in all the other uninterrupted paths. It corresponds to what are called the 8 forbearances, and the path of release corresponds to the 8 knowledges. All right. During the 8 forbearances, where you're having a forbearance or kind of a tolerance with regard to the Four Noble Truths and the knowledge of the Four Noble Truths in terms of their emptiness, we'll go through those in a moment. The realization of the lack of inherent existence is applied first to objects, the Four Noble Truths, and then to subjects, the awarenesses that know the emptiness of the Four Noble Truths. In other words, to the Four Noble Truths, which are the 4 Dharma forbearances, and the subjects that realize the absence of inherent existence with respect to them. That is, the 4 subsequent forbearances. So what's happening, they say, sorry, I shouldn't have taken it off of that, but I'm going to go back to, well, first I got to clear up my visual here. I'm getting fuzzy. It's kind of late here. Okay, so what happens is you have these 8 forbearances, which in the lower schools, they actually explain these as happening sequentially. So that's why we talk about 16 moments of the path of seeing in some contexts. But what's happening for Prasangika Madhyamaka is that you are realizing the emptiness of all phenomena when you realize emptiness in that first uninterrupted path on the path of seeing. So whatever it is that you're observing as the object, that is the object upon which you're analyzing for emptiness, such as the I, that's included again within the phenomena that existed. You are going to realize the emptiness of that, and that is the same emptiness you're realizing in regard to all phenomena. So you remove the obscurations with regard to acquired ones with regard to the Four Noble Truths, and then the subjects that are knowing the Four Noble Truths. Let's go to a little chart that I did have Venerable Dundra put out there. And this is the chart portion of it that comes from a little handout that I found on the internet that I think was from, I don't know if this was from the Institute of Dialectics in Dharamsala or what, but so what's happening when you have the uninterrupted path? You have what's called, again, forbearances. You have 4 of them that are called Dharma forbearance because you are realizing the emptiness of the Dharmas that are the truth of suffering, origin, cessation, and path, the Four Noble Truths. And you are realizing in that moment the emptiness of these. Again, you don't have the conventional phenomena appearing to you at all. So you are only realizing the emptiness of all these things. That's why we can say you're realizing the emptiness of all of these simultaneously, is because you're realizing the emptiness of any phenomenon is the same emptiness of all phenomena. Again, in the lower schools, you would go through these sequentially. But in the higher school, the highest school, Prasangika Madhyamaka, these all happen simultaneously. We have to talk about not just these phenomena that are being observed, that are the objects. We also have to talk about the subjective awarenesses that are knowing those. That's what are called here subsequent forbearances. There are the first through the fourth of those. If we look at just the first one, it's called the first Dharma forbearance, is the observed object, meaning the uninterrupted path that directly realizes the emptiness of the truths of suffering. So you are realizing the emptiness of that uninterrupted path, of that subjective awareness. It's the emptiness of the first Dharma forbearance. Your first cognition of emptiness with regard to truths of suffering is being realized as empty itself, because all phenomena are being realized as empty. Then you have the second one, that is the uninterrupted path that directly realizes the emptiness of the truths of origins, which was your second Dharma forbearance. Up there, you're seeing the emptiness of that. So we're seeing both the emptiness of the objects of our consciousness, as well as the consciousnesses that are knowing those objects, because we're seeing the emptiness of all phenomena. This is what is happening on the uninterrupted path. Again, in the lower schools, you go through a sequential process of realizing these each individually. I think it happens in a sequence of first the Dharma forbearance of truths of suffering, and then the subsequent forbearance of the knowledge of that Dharma forbearance being empty of inherent existence, and so on. But again, it's not usually taught with emptiness of inherent existence, because the lower schools don't teach that. They teach different ways of analyzing these. So again, this is just a chart to give you an idea of what all is being sort of realized at that moment. You're realizing the emptiness of all phenomena, and we can say by virtue of that, you're realizing the emptiness of these four subjects, or four objects, and four subjective awarenesses that realize the emptiness of those objects. If we look at the next chart, which was on another handout that, again, I had Venerable Dunda put out there. Again, there's more to these handouts. You can read that, but it's not as relevant. I mostly wanted to get the charts to you. These are the knowledges. These are what happens the next moment when you have the path of release. You have the first Dharma knowledge, second, third, and fourth, that correspond to the first Dharma forbearance, and so on. So you have kind of a path of release that occurs with regard to each of those. And then you have the first subsequent knowledge, and second and third and fourth, and so on, which again correspond to the first through the fourth subsequent forbearances. So again, this is just essentially saying that you have these 16 things that are correlated, 8 of them with the uninterrupted path, 8 of them with the liberated path. But it's because on the Prasangika path of seeing, you're realizing the emptiness of all phenomena. So we're going to kind of lump them all in here and include them, even though you're not specifically seeing the emptiness with regard to that unique phenomenon, but you are seeing the emptiness of all phenomena. So therefore you are denying the emptiness of, or the inherent existence of true sufferings. You're denying the inherent existence of true paths, and so on. You see what I'm kind of getting at with this? It's a very complicated presentation to get this point across, but nonetheless, we'll carry on with our little presentation here, even though we're almost at 8:30 there. So, all right. So again, during these 8 forbearances, you're realizing the and lack of inherent existence of objects, the Four Noble Truths, and then subjects, the awarenesses that know those Four Noble Truths to be empty of inherent existence. Through direct realization, I didn't put that in the slide. Let me do the slide here. Through direct realization of the emptinesses that qualify these objects, artificial conceptions of inherent existence with respect to the Four Noble Truths are simultaneously abandoned. So this is what's happening on the path of seeing, is that you're realizing the emptiness of inherent existence, and it's removing any of these acquired or artificial conceptions of inherent existence with regard to the Four Noble Truths. In other words, the initial direct realization of emptiness causes the artificial conceptions of inherent existence to be abandoned simultaneously with respect to true sufferings, true origins, true cessations, and true paths. So you're realizing the emptiness of all these phenomena. The emptiness of the wisdom consciousness cognizing these emptinesses is also realized at the same time. Those are the subsequent ones. This realization is nevertheless called subsequent, he says, because in the lower systems of tenets, there is a step-by-step procedure, even though in this system, an actual temporal sequence does not occur. So again, those are subsequent to realizing the emptiness of Four Noble Truths. Then you realize the emptiness of the consciousness, knowing the emptiness of the Four Noble Truths. But again, in our system, you're realizing them all at the same time because you're realizing the emptiness of all phenomena. This is from Geshe Jumpa Tekjok, his commentary on Grounds and Paths. He says, in the first moment of the path of seeing, the dharmic forbearance, or dharma forbearance of true suffering, directly understands the reality, emptiness of true sufferings. Such an understanding has never before arisen in the mind of this bodhisattva. That mind, the object possessor, and emptiness of true suffering, the object, become oneness, like water mixed with water. And the bodhisattva is able to forbear true sufferings without fear. That's why these are called forbearances. At the same time, the emptiness of true origins is realized. And so the same mind is called dharmic forbearance of true origins. Similarly, the emptiness of true cessations and of the true path is realized. And so the same mind is called dharmic forbearance of true cessation and dharmic forbearance of the true path. In other words, we could call it all four of those because all four are being realized, because the emptiness of all phenomena is being realized. The four subsequent forbearances occur together and at the same time as the four dharmic forbearances, even though, again, they're called subsequent. That's only in relation to the lower schools who do realize them in a sequential manner. The dharmic forbearances of the Four Noble Truths are the direct realizations of the emptiness of the Four Noble Truths. At the same time that they occur, the mind indirectly realizes itself, and these indirect realizations of the emptinesses of the minds realizing the emptinesses of the Four Noble Truths are the four subsequent forbearances. So this was just another explanation from Geshe Japa Tekchok on what we had just looked at with Jeffrey Hopkins' words. I just found when I was presenting it initially in that course, it helped to have kind of two different perspectives, words behind that. Now, Geshe Japa Tekchok continues, the dharmic forbearance of true suffering is so called because it realizes the emptiness of true suffering and can endure the realization of this fact. The subsequent forbearance of true suffering is so called because the same mind realizes the emptiness of itself, the dharmic forbearance of true suffering, and is able to endure the realization of this fact. Because we are forbearing, enduring the realization of the emptiness of all phenomena. So both the object that is known and the subjective awareness knowing the emptiness of that object. The same can be said for each of the Four Noble Truths. The dharmic forbearance of true origins is so called because it realizes the emptiness of true origins, and so on. All right. We say dharmic forbearance because the mind directly realizes the dharma dhatu, the dharma nature of the Four Noble Truths. And we say subsequent forbearance because, although its direct object is always emptiness, the same mind indirectly realizes itself, the dharmic forbearance. Thus, all 8 forbearances occur at the same time, without the mind needing to turn to any of those objects, because you're simply realizing emptiness. Again, remember that in the uninterrupted path and the path of release, all that is appearing to the mind is emptiness. The 8 forbearances only occur during the uninterrupted path of the path of seeing, when one is in the process of abandoning the intellectual or artificial conceptions of true existence. The 8 knowledges, the knowledge that those artificial conceptions of inherent existence have been abandoned, are the path of release. And that was the other chart that I showed you. That very next moment when you have the path of release in relation to all of those, the knowledges that are subsequent. The results of the 8 forbearances are the 8 knowledges. These give 8 names to the liberated path of the path of seeing, the dharmic and the subsequent knowledges of each of the Four Noble Truths. Dharmic knowledge being that of true suffering and so on, because you're abandoning the afflictions in relation to that. On the completion of that action, the mind is free from those afflictions, and the dharmic knowledge of true suffering is attained. That's the path of release, again, in that next moment. As soon as this knowledge arises, the remaining 3 dharmic knowledges also arise. I mean, again, they're arising simultaneously because the afflictions in relation to the Four Noble Truths are abandoned at the same time. The 4 subsequent knowledges are so called because they are minds that indirectly realize themselves, the 4 dharmic knowledges, and know their emptinesses. I added in brackets there. They arise at the same time as the 4 dharmic knowledges because we know the emptiness of all phenomena, and therefore the path of release occurs at the same time for all 8 of those, the 4 objects and the 4 subjects. The presentation, back to Jeffrey Hopkins, the presentation of 8 parts to the uninterrupted path and 8 parts to the path of release details phenomena qualified by emptiness, which a yogi might take as objects of meditation on the 2 prior paths, accumulation and preparation. And the simultaneous functioning of these 8 indicate the great power of direct realization of emptiness, because the direct realization of emptiness removes all of them at the same time. You don't have to, again, be focused on each object as your basis to realize emptiness in order to remove the acquired afflictions pertaining to that object. For the Hinayana schools, it's possible to ascend these 16 steps one by one, and that's how they present it. But again, the Prasangikas, on the other hand, say it's necessarily limited to this 2-step simultaneous procedure, because a consciousness directly cognizing emptiness necessarily realizes the emptiness of all objects of knowledge. Thus, it is not necessary to pass from one to the other among the various phenomena qualified by emptiness, the four objects, the four subjective awarenesses, and so on. In one meditative sitting, a yogi passes from the fourth and last level of the path of preparation, called supreme mundane qualities, all the way through the uninterrupted path and then the path of release, of the path of seeing. When that bodhisattva arises from meditative equipoise, they have a consciousness called subsequent attainment that is influenced by the previous direct realization of emptiness. Although phenomena appear to be inherently existent, the bodhisattva, like a magician viewing their own creations, knows that all phenomena are empty of inherent existence. Later, when they forget the direct realization, I mean, they don't completely forget it, but you have a distracted subsequent attainment. It's not as present in the mind as it was coming out of the meditative equipoise. You'll still have it informing your awareness, but you just don't have it at that level. 2 points that we've talked about previously: from the Mahayana path of seeing onwards, the bodhisattva no longer accumulates projecting karma for rebirth and samsara. Remember that. There's no longer any projecting karma for rebirth that you create, because you're no longer having any manifest form of ignorance that would do that. From this point on, also, the bodhisattva will no longer be born uncontrollably through the power of afflictions and projecting karma. That's projecting karma that was attained prior to the path of seeing, but rather is born in a deliberate manner through the power of compassion and prayer in order to benefit sentient beings. So that was everything, most of everything I prepared in that course around the path of seeing and what happens here. And that was to give you the context to look at this passage that we didn't get to, unfortunately, that starts on the top of page, towards the top of page 191. So what I'd like you to do, rather than continuing to teach, which I think might be a little disastrous, is to maybe try to read through this subsequent to this class and see if this sort of makes sense. Again, it's the top of page, very top of page 192. With the specific explanation of knowledge and forbearance on the path of seeing. Let me just show you that what we talked about a little bit at the end of this path of preparation is when you go into this meditative equipoise. This S and M that are abbreviated there, qualities, that's supreme mundane qualities, meaning that you have the highest worldly or mundane qualities at that level before you develop the super mundane path that is the uninterrupted path of the path of seeing, and then the path of release that occurs immediately after it. So that was what Jeffrey Hopkins was talking about towards the end there, that the bodhisattva goes into this meditative equipoise at the end of this fourth level of the path of preparation, and in a single sitting, they go through the uninterrupted path and into the path of release, and they remove all of these obscurations that are acquired in relation to these phenomena that exist, the Four Noble Truths and the subjective awarenesses of the emptiness of the Four Noble Truths and everything. So again, we will start with this page, page 192, is it that we're at? Yeah, 192, when we resume next week. And I hope I don't have to explain all over again everything I just explained. We'll touch on it briefly when we get back together. So there are a few questions to pursue in regard to the homework that I would like you to discuss. Let's see. I've got to pull this down for a second and go over to that homework. Where's the homework? I think it's here. Again, if you want to review a little bit from what we went through last week to set out the 9 obscurations and how they're related in terms of the 4 classes of persons. We didn't get to the final section that wraps up that whole topic of the 4 classes of persons. That'll be verse 134 and the commentary that's on, I think, 193. I was hoping to get to that tonight, but I was being optimistic. If you feel like you've exhausted your discussion of that, though, then feel free to go on to the second question, the more extensive explanation of the objects of abandonment. What are the 2 types of obscurations and how are they explained? What paths grounds set out in the presentation of the 5 paths abandon them? And how does such abandonment occur? Again, I don't want you to necessarily feel like you have to go into the level of detail that I just went through, but just to have some understanding of the uninterrupted path, the path of release, and so on. I won't say much more. So All right, so I'm going to go check and make sure my mom got to bed okay, and then I'll be back and I'll tune into the discussion. So